at one point I was so stressed out and so overwhelmed. And I just thought, oh my gosh, what can I do? I'm a really spiritual person. And I called a mentor of mine who's very spiritually minded and sort of, barfed out all my woes to her. And she patiently listened on the phone. And then she said, Traci, I have just one question for you. I'm like, what? And she's like, what would you do if you weren't afraid? How would you solve these problems? What actions would you take if you weren't afraid? And I was like, oh my gosh, felt the whole weight lift off of me. And I quickly could see, yeah, I am being controlled by fear. I'm acting from a place of fear. And we all know that, oh my gosh, right? We all have those moments of fear where you just feel like you're in the fog. You feel the heaviness. No amount of caffeine is going to get you through that. So how do we lift that off? And what I've taught to thousands of leaders around the world, and I teach it in the book, is really 5 questions to help us break out of fear and get to freedom. And if it's okay, Gino, I'd love to go through those 5 questions.
Absolutely. I was actually going to list them out, but go through them. And I think everyone right now, if you're at a place where you can take some notes, these 5 questions are important because they're, when you ask the right question, you get the right answer. And when you ask better questions, you get better answers. So it's important that you follow up with that. What would you do if you weren't afraid with these 5 questions to yourself? So shoot.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so the 5 questions, and I call this the power question practice. Why do I call it power question? Because when we're in fear, we are not in our power. We're totally off center. But when we're in freedom, then we reclaim our sense of power. And these 5 questions you can use on yourself. You can use them when your business partner or your spouse or your kids come to you and they're afraid. I've used this with so many people in my life. It's breakthrough after breakthrough. So I want you to think of a challenge that you're dealing with. It could be related to your work. It could be real estate. It could be at home, personal, professional. Just try to think of a challenge you're dealing with, okay, in your mind. So here are the 5 questions of the power question practice. The first question is, what are you afraid of? Like, really, what are you afraid of? And sometimes people go, well, I'm afraid, if this doesn't work out, I won't have enough money, or if this doesn't, but you got to go deeper to this. Like, what is it that you're actually afraid of? Often what it comes back to is we're afraid of death in some form, death of finances, death of reputation, death of trust, or we're afraid of failure, or we're afraid of what others might think of us. So it's getting really clear as you think about that challenge, like what exactly is at the core of it that you're afraid of? The second question is, why are you afraid? What is it that's driving that fear? Is it because of something that's happened in the past? Is it because you're projecting something into the future that might happen? Why are you afraid? Now we get to the power question itself, which is, what would you do if you weren't afraid? How would you solve that problem? What actions would you take? What conversations would you have? What opportunities would you go for if you weren't afraid? Now, I'm not talking about reckless fearlessness here. I'm talking about responsible fearlessness. What would you do if you weren't afraid? The fourth question is, how would you feel without that fear? How would you feel? I mean, people are, oh, right? I'd feel lighter. I'd feel energized. I'd feel more joyous. People are always saying to me, why are you so happy? I'm like, because I'm not governed by fear, So how would you feel without that fear? And the last question is really important, which is this: why is it okay to let the fear go? Why is it okay to let that fear go? Again, for me, I'm a really spiritual person. I believe the universe is good. I believe God has my back. But for some people, it's like, yeah, I can let it go because, I've worked it out before, or I'm not going to end up under a bridge. Someone will help me out, or whatever. You got to understand, people always say, well, let it go. Well, I think it's kind of hard to let it go if you don't know what you're letting it go to, So why can you let it go? So those are the 5 questions. What are you afraid of? Why are you afraid? What would you do if you weren't afraid? How would you feel without the fear? And why is it okay to let that fear go?